What's up guys, welcome back to the channel, and in this video we're going to be working on this 2004 Honda Accord, and I'm going to show you how to replace the front lower ball joint. So let's get started. Alright, so the first thing we have to do here is jack up the car. Alright, next thing you want to do is remove your lug nuts and take the wheel off. If you don't have an air or an electric impact, then break the lug nuts loose before you jack up the car, otherwise the tire is just going to spin as you go to take it off. To do this job, we're going to have to remove the knuckle, and to do that, obviously you have to take the axle nut off. So I'm going to start with that since I'm here anyway. This axle nut is the kind that gets mushroomed in and like peened over, so it locks in that way. So you have to get something in there and basically punch it out so it becomes round again so you can take it off. It's best if you have a really powerful electric impact or an air impact. If you have to do it with a breaker bar, I would suggest putting the car back on the ground. Well, take the center cap off the wheel, put the car back on the ground, obviously tighten the lug nuts, and have someone use the parking brake and then have someone step on the brakes at the same time and then try and break this loose. There are other tricks that you can use, such as putting it in reverse and, using the leverage of the vehicle, but that's always sketchy, so I wouldn't really suggest doing that. Alright, so mine is broken free. As you can see, if yours is stuck in here, make sure you spray some WD-40 or whatever in there. Get it all lubricated and then use this center hole to punch it out. If you don't have a punch, put the nut back on, use a hammer, just don't ruin the threads. Turning the wheel makes it easier to get to the tie rod. Tie rod is a 17mm nut. You can hit the knuckle right here on this little bump and that should break it free. There you go. I like to put the hardware back on if I can so I don't misplace it or lose it or whatever. Now turn the knuckle the other way and we'll get the brakes off. Alright, you need to detach the brake hose from the knuckle. You can either take these two 10s off or this single 12mm. This big one's less likely to break, so that's why I went for that one. Next, you want to get a bungee cord ready, and we're going to hang the caliper by the upper control arm or the strut after we take the two caliper bracket bolts out. Alright, two 17mm bolts here. If you have the two rotor screws in here, they're Phillips head, and well, good luck taking those off. So this side has an ABS sensor. I'm going to unbolt it from the knuckle everywhere and then disconnect it from inside the car because most likely, at least in the climate that I live in, this thing's not coming out of the knuckle without destroying it. So I'm going to keep it in the knuckle and I'm going to try my best to be as careful as I can. Up here where it connects into the car has two little tabs. So with a pick or a flathead screwdriver, you can pry these inward and it should pop out of here. There we go. It's hard for me to show this process. I can't get the camera and my hands up in there, but so technically this isn't supposed to come out. It is supposed to be clipped in there, but if you go inside the engine bay and follow the wire, you should find the clip somewhere. Because this came out for me, I'm gonna just disconnect it here and then I'm gonna find the wire in there when I put it back in. Next thing is upper ball joint. It's a 15mm nut for me, yours might be different. Next, you want to hammer on the knuckle. Just make sure not to hit the boot or the threads. There you go, that should pop loose. And as you pull this knuckle down, make sure to press the axle in so you don't accidentally separate it. So that's loose. Now we can move along to the lower ball joint. Next, the cotter pin needs to come out of the lower ball joint. And take the nut off. It's an 18mm. At this point, there are multiple ways to separate this. You could use a pickle fork, because obviously we're replacing this ball joint, or you could either hammer on the knuckle, pull up at the same time. I've also had a lot of good luck by just using a jack on this ball joint here, on the stud of the ball joint, pressing up, give it a couple whacks, and it should pop right off. Jack up on it a little bit. There you have it. All right, next you want to remove this locking ring clip right here. This one's slightly damaged, so I'm gonna have to fix that. Next, you have two options for removing this. You can either hammer it out as it is, or cut the stud and hammer it out, or you could use a ball joint press, and you'll need this tool anyway to put it back in, otherwise you'll damage the ball joint because you have to press it in from the top. You could either use this to take it off, or you could just hammer it off. I've done it in the past where I cut the stud with a grinder, and then just used the hammer, pressed it out, comes out pretty easy. But this time I'm going to use the press and just... So the trick to this is you want to find a cup that will fit around this ball joint. I might not have one. As you can see, this cup doesn't fit because it's literally the size of the ball joint. So this would be good to press it in. And the slightly larger cup I have is way too big. So I think what I'm going to do is go with the hammer it out method. Yeah, this is not gonna work. It'll work great for reinstalling, but not for removal. You just have to be careful of the studs if you do this. So to use that method, I'm gonna take off this boot. This ball joint, by the way, I'm replacing it because it was squeaking. It didn't have any play, but the grease is in, well, very poor condition. It seems to be locking in place, like right here. This is smooth right here, and then as soon as you go back to the middle, it like snaps into place, so it's definitely worn. I'm gonna cut the stud as close as possible to the, flush with the base of the ball joint. So the reason I cut the stud, I realized I didn't explain why, but when you hammer on this stud, it's just going to want to go all over the place unless it's seized. But if you cut it, you got a flat surface to hammer on. As you can see, it comes out pretty easy. All right, now that you got your new ball joint, you can take the nut off. At this point, you can take the boot off if you want, or you can just be super gentle when you install it, and you can even grease the hole in here so that it slides in. But a lot of times, I don't know if you can tell on camera, but the boot is actually a little bit wider than the splined part here. So yes, it's a boot, it'll squeeze. If you're worried about it ripping, tearing or anything, then take it off. A lot of times these springs in here that hold the boot are super annoying and difficult to put on, so another advantage of taking it off is you can add grease in there, but you can do that afterwards anyway. If you have a grease gun with the pointy adapter, you can just stick it in there and grease it up. Next, it would be best to remove the boot from the ball joint. These clips are annoying to put on, but it's doable. There you go. And this way you can also grease it when you're done with it. So put it in here, start it in by hand, well, as much as you can. You want to find a cup that fits over the ball joint loosely so that it can accept it on this side. All right, next you use your 22mm socket and drive it in. Just keep checking it and make sure it's actually going in straight. Okay, go ahead and put the boot back on once you're sure it's the ball joint is seated all the way. And with a little bit of prying, this ring should slide right over. There we go. Perfect. You can twist the boot, check the locking ring clip thing, whatever. Awesome. And lastly, before the knuckle goes on, just put this ring back in here, this locking ring. Make sure it's in all the way, otherwise it'll make contact with the ring that's around the axle. All right, Let's get this knuckle back on the car. All right, if you're feeling creative, you can go ahead and paint some anti-seize on the axle splines. That'll help it not stick and seize up in the future. The ball joint and the axle go in at the same time. Just keep wiggling and they'll both fall into place. Okay, this is like the world's stiffest ball joint. Get the upper ball joint connected and then we'll snug them both up. If you want torque specs, I'll put them down in the description for you. All right, here on the bottom, we've upgraded to a 22 millimeter nut now. That's pretty beefy. Torque that to spec too. Make sure whatever you do that your cotter pin hole lines up, and if it doesn't, always tighten, never loosen. If you want to use thread locker on it, you can. Just make sure you don't over torque it, because if you do, the castle things will just spread right out and then they don't grip anymore. So run your cotter pin and bend it over. Use your cotter pin bender. Let's get the brakes back on next. If your hub is dirty or rusty, go ahead and clean that up a little bit so that the rotor can mount flat. I'm gonna just quickly wire brush it. It's fairly clean, it's just a little dirty, and then put some anti-seize on it. Okay, this is cleaned up and anti-seized. Put the rotor on. If you still have the locking screws, make sure they line up. I don't, so it doesn't really matter which way I put it. You can put a lug nut on if you want to hold the rotor in place. Get your caliper, make sure the pads are still seated in there properly, and slide it over. 2 bolts started. And tighten them up. Again, torque specs in the description if you want them. Don't forget to get this brake hose reconnected to the strut bracket here. And get the tie rod reconnected. Technically this should have a cotter pin, but mine's broken. All right, last thing to do is put this ABS wire back on. Start with putting it back onto the control arm here. All right, so under the hood, the ABS connector is right back there. You can see the orange thing. It's supposed to be attached to the firewall or strut tower or whatever, but mine's broken, so I can't film this part, but I connected it off camera because basically you can just barely fit your arm back here and that's it. So I had to connect it one-handed, which was a challenge, but it's done. So let's go back down there and put the wheels on. Don't forget the axle nut. I'll provide the torque for this in the description. All right, and before we torque the wheel, let's get the car back on the ground. Okay, so I was able to snug the lug nuts pretty tight when the car was up in the air. If you didn't do that, then don't put the car all the way on the ground, just a little bit, and then torque them. I'm going to torque these to 80 foot-pounds. And with that, the car is ready to go. You do not have to do these ball joints in pairs unless you want to, but most likely if one's bad, the other one is not far behind unless it's a special circumstance where you hit a pothole or sat in water or whatever the case may be. So in my case, I just replaced this one because I know for sure that one's still good. This one I think just got water in it, so it kind of just went bad by itself. So with that said, I hope the video was helpful. If you have anything to say, leave it down in the comment section below. Again, all the tools that I used as well as the parts are linked down in the description, so check those out if you're interested. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.